You're doing amazing, sweetie. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. Since I'll be uploading this video on Mother's Day, I thought I would talk about one of the most iconic momagers in the world, Kris Jenner and the Jenner clan. Now I'm going to break down the Jenner clan in terms of masculine and feminine energies. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I have a lot of videos on this content, but a brief summary: masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies. We all have a core energy. This is when we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. We can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies, and each of these energies contains archetypes. We all contain all of the archetypes within us, so we can tap into whenever we need to. I have a lot of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes if you want to learn more. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine, because opposite energies attract sexually, same energies repel sexually. I also want to make a note, because there is a transgendered person in this general conversation, none of this stuff has anything to do with being transgendered or not transgendered or anything like that. This is about energies. Before I get started, a few disclaimers. First of all, if you are expecting this video to be just a complete hit piece where I criticize every single thing about the Jenner family, probably not the video for you. If you were expecting me to just praise them and say that they're the greatest thing in the world and talk about them as being wonderful, not the video for you either. I'm going to try to give a very nuanced view of the Jenner family, specifically Kris Jenner and her brood. I also want to note that I don't typically do breakdowns of actual celebrities. I mostly do film breakdowns. In a film breakdown, it's established that everybody is playing a character, even if they're playing a real life person. It's a specific film piece, and we're not talking about anybody personally. With the Kardashian Jenner clan, I don't know what they're like behind closed doors. I'm assuming most people that are watching this don't know them personally, don't know what they're really like, so I am solely basing my observations about the family and their masculine and feminine energies completely on what they are presenting to us in the public. And they have been very in the public eye, very open. They've had their reality show. I'm solely basing it on what they are presenting themselves as. I don't know what they're like in real life, so none of this is actually about who they really are behind closed doors. Maybe they're the same, maybe they're completely different, I don't know. Just about how they are presenting themselves to the public. I'm also not exactly sure what the official protocol is behind this, because it's going to get into a little bit of a tricky area when we start talking about Caitlyn Jenner, simply because I don't know the actual official etiquette around this. So I'm just going to establish that I'm going to refer to Caitlyn Jenner as Bruce Jenner when Caitlyn was presenting themselves as Bruce Jenner. I'm going to refer to Caitlyn Jenner as Caitlyn Jenner when Caitlyn Jenner is Caitlyn Jenner. Mostly I'm going to be talking about Caitlyn as Bruce, because that's what was presented to us on the show, on the Kardashians and Bruce's relationship with Kris. I'm probably going to refer to him as him because he was the man, he was the male in the relationship at that point in time. So just for clarity's sake, I'm not denying that Bruce is now Caitlyn. Caitlyn is a female now. For the sake of this conversation, I think it's important to point out the way that things were in the relationship when it was Kris and Bruce. If that offends anybody, that's not my intention. It's literally for simplicity's sake. So we'll get into that in a minute. I want to talk about Kris Jenner for a second, and this might be controversial to say. Can you question Kris Jenner's morality? Yes. Can you question her ethics? Absolutely. What you cannot question is Kris Jenner's results. If you don't like how she got her results, valid argument, but you can't deny her results. She made at least 2 of her kids into billionaires. And honestly, we're talking about a family with no discernible talent. And it is interesting because Kris Jenner's not the first momager, so to speak, but she arguably is the best. Like, she's arguably done it the best. And I would actually say that Kris has possibly even done better than a lot of, like, they didn't call them dadagers, but a lot of men in history that have been managers. And I actually think back to, it was quite a few years ago, I think, at this point, but it was, you know, not too long ago, that Joe Jackson, who was the father figure of the Jackson family, passed away. And I was hearing people say things, because he was notoriously a child abuser, notoriously questionable parent, I'll put it that way. And a lot of people were saying, like, okay, yes, he did a lot of bad things, but you know what? he got his family where they needed to be. You know, he did what he had to do to, you know, get his kids out of poverty, and he did what he had to do to, you know, get his kids fame and all this kind of stuff and whatever. And now I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't justify what he did to get where he got. But if you can look at somebody like that who was actually like beating their kids and doing a lot of really questionable things, a lot of really sick, questionable things that happened to these kids when they were underage and on the road and things like that. If you can justify that, you should justify what Kris is doing. Not saying that everybody would, but I'm just saying, and I know there's the aspect that yes, Joe Jackson was getting his kids out of poverty. Kris Jenner's had financial ups and downs over the years in the past, but she probably was not likely in poverty. So that's a different situation. But you can also argue that Joe Jackson had some pretty raw talent that he was working with. Kris Jenner had really not much talent that she was working with, and arguably made her kids just as successful, if not more successful. So, you know, I'm not justifying Kris's means to get to an end, but you can't argue with the end. I suppose the fact that it's their backsides that got them popular. Anyway, that's a whole bad joke. So one of the reasons I was inspired to do this breakdown is because I actually saw a woman online, I don't remember what her account was, that was doing a breakdown of the Kardashians in terms of narcissism and narcissistic behavior. All valid points, and I actually did appreciate the way that she presented it. So I wanted to talk about the Jenner clan more in terms of the masculine and the feminine energies. I'm not going to focus on the narcissistic aspects, and yes, there are some there, not in all of the members of the family, but there are definitely some narcissistic qualities, but I'm not going to focus on those as much. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the masculine and feminine energies, wounded and healed, that you're seeing in all the members of the family. So basically the origin story of the Kardashians is essentially Kris and Robert Kardashian, and they have 3 girls and a boy. They have obviously Kourtney, Kim, Khloe, and Rob. Not a lot is known about their relationship. I do know that Kris was a stewardess. She met Robert, who's a successful lawyer. He was quite a bit older than her. It was kind of a typical like older man meets younger woman. He's got money, she's got youth and beauty, and they get together. Not a lot is known about Robert Kardashian because he wasn't really around when the show got popular and when they really got mainstream popularity. He is presented a lot by the kids as sort of being this really great, amazing man and father, and maybe he was. I do know that Kris has admitted that their marriage fell apart when she had an affair. I don't justify infidelity, but she has admitted to that being the downfall of her marriage, and she has at least publicly made it seem as if she regretted it. We don't really know that much about the health of their actual marriage. I would point out, this is not a justification for any kind of infidelity or anything on Kris's part, but Robert Kardashian was a very close friend of O.J. Simpson. And you usually can tell a lot about a person by the company that they keep. And if we were going to have a poster child for a toxic male, O.J. Simpson's face would be right smack next to it, right? So Kris admits that her marriage fell apart because she had an affair. Considering the company that Robert kept, I think she's lucky to be alive right now. So again, we don't know too much about their relationship, but I would actually be willing to bet that seeing as though Robert was a very successful lawyer, Kris being married to him is probably where she learned a lot of her business skills. She was a stewardess. I don't know if she had much of an education, so to speak, but the fact that she has been so amazing at managing her kids' careers and making the term momager into really what it is. She was not the first momager, but she's arguably the best. I would be willing to bet that a lot of that was what she learned from being in a relationship with Robert Kardashian. I think it's a fair assumption. Whether he intentionally taught her what he knew or whether she just picked it up from being around him. Now, when their marriage split, they actually were going through a really messy divorce, and she started dating Bruce Jenner. Bruce Jenner, Olympic athlete. Now, I'm going to refer to Bruce as Bruce Jenner because in that point in time, that is how the world perceived him. That is how Kris perceived him. So him being Bruce Jenner in a biological male body was the state of their relationship at that point. Whether he felt like he was actually a woman at that time, which I think he said he did, I just want to like set that aside. Kris and Bruce get together. Now Bruce is an iconic Olympic athlete on a Wheaties box, get all these endorsement deals. An aspect of Bruce Jenner, which is totally separate from any of his gender stuff. Aspect of Bruce Jenner that you really do see throughout, I think, a lot of their relationship as it was presented on the show is that Bruce really, you see this a lot in athletes that gain a lot of success. They somehow sort of freeze in time to that sort of time period, and Bruce had a very childlike quality about him. Apparently, as it was presented to us, that Bruce had a lot of endorsement deals, had made a lot of money, and had not handled that money well, and had been very like carefree. That's usually a sign of very wounded feminine energy. Could that be because Bruce actually felt like they were Caitlyn? Maybe. I don't know. But it is a sign that Bruce was in very wounded feminine energy. Kris is now going through this messy divorce with a, you know, man who resented her, is the way it was presented. And she's got 4 kids. She doesn't really have a lot of job skills. And she's not really going to be raising 4 kids and going off working as a stewardess, right? She ends up with Bruce stepping in, and they get together. And apparently, as part of the deal, at least the way it's my understanding, the way it's been presented, is that Bruce really took Robert aside and said, don't worry, I'll take care of Kris and the kids and get this divorce done. I'm going to marry her, and then, you know, I'll take care of everything. So I think Kris saw this as like, okay, Bruce is going to step in and take care of me. He's this iconic Olympic athlete. I'm gonna be okay, my kids are gonna be okay. So apparently what actually happened was Bruce really was not in a good financial position. Bruce had no idea how to handle money. Bruce had made a lot of money, but he'd also made a lot of really bad financial decisions and did not really actually have a grasp on his money. You see that a lot with wounded feminine energy, is not being very good with money. Very often with wounded feminine energy, you see a lot of obsessive spending, which is really kind of what was going on, it seems like, at the time. This, to me, seems like a very pivotal moment when Kris went into panic mode. She had 4 kids. Now Bruce was also the father of 4 kids. Kris is realizing, wow, Bruce is terrible with money. Kris has to go into survival mode because now she has 4 kids that are her responsibility. She's married a man that has 4 other kids that are their responsibility. He's bad with money. She goes into panic mode. She's now in a state of survival where she has to try to use whatever means they have in order to get success. So what does she decide to do? She decides to manage Bruce's career and starts getting him gigs as a motivational speaker. He's an Olympic athlete. He's been in a Wheaties box. He's iconic. She really manages him and makes him into a very high-paid motivational speaker. She is now managing his career, managing the family, managing everything. And I'm pretty sure that when Caitlyn actually wrote her book about her experience, actually talked a lot about Kris, and Kris being the one that took all the money, and Kris being the one that wouldn't let him do this or do that or do this, which is also a sign of wounded feminine energy, playing the victim in that sense. And like, I remember on the show, Kris's response was like, well, yeah, I was managing the family. I took the money because I was paying the bills. Kris was the one that had to manage the money and manage the family, was the one that had to pay for the kids' school clothes, was the one that had to pay for the food and that this and that. Like, she was managing the money. She was in that masculine role. In a relationship, if the male presenting person does not step into the masculine, and especially if they're in wounded feminine energy, which may have to do with, you know, his gender confusion or anything like that, don't know. However, there are a lot of biological males that have very wounded feminine energy. So one of the reasons why I want to emphasize this as being like a Kris and Bruce situation is because in biological male-female relationships, this is very common. When you have the male presenting person that is in a wounded feminine energy, so they're not responsible with money, they tend to act very childlike, irresponsible, play the victims, things like that, and they're not stepping up, the female in the relationship is going to have to be the masculine, because you need a leader. You need someone to take charge. You need someone to be, I mean, she was a stewardess. You need someone to pilot the ship, right? So like the stewardess had to become the pilot. I'll put it that way, right? That's what had to happen. She couldn't be the stewardess, if we want to keep using that analogy of the plane, and greet people and, you know, like socialize and, you know, I haven't been on that many planes. I don't really know what stewardesses do, but like be the one that calms people's nerves. And she couldn't really be the, you know, the one that's focused on the community. She had to be the one behind the wheel with the direction, because Bruce in that time period did not have the direction. And I gotta be honest, in that whole series, there were a lot of indications that Bruce was very much in his wounded feminine. So Kris really did become the masculine of the family, and she really has held that. So Kris herself is a very masculine being. Now, is she feminine at her core? Could be. You know, most women are. It's kind of hard to know, because at this point she is so much in her masculine energy. She's the one in charge, and I think that's one of the reasons why people perceive her as being a narcissist. Does she have narcissistic tendencies? Very likely. Is she a narcissist? I don't know. There's a lot of arguments out there that she is, and I'm not saying she's not. But very often when you have a woman who is so much in her masculine energy, she will often be perceived as being narcissistic, whether she is or whether she isn't. You could arguably say she is. I don't know. In the process of her learning how to manage her, at that point, husband's career, she notices that she has a daughter, Kim, who is starting to get attention. So she starts managing Kim's career. And that's where things start taking off. Now, of course, there's the sex tape controversy. All I'm going to say about the sex tape controversy is that now that evidence has come out that Kris and Kim were all involved in that Kris actually watched the sex tapes before it was released, apparently there were several, to pick the one where Kim looked the best. Do I think that's creepy? Yes, absolutely. Is that a very sketchy thing for a mother to do? Absolutely. There's two things that I want to point out. One thing that I've actually had a few conversations with people online that they tell me I'm missing the point, but I think they're missing the point. For one thing, Kim was a legal adult at the time. Is it weird that Kris was involved? Yes. Is it immoral? You could argue it is. However, Kim was a legal adult, and if Kim wanted to make the decision to do this, and she wanted her mother's assistance in getting popular, again, it's weird, it's creepy, I'm not justifying it. However, it's not the weirdest, creepiest thing that's going on in Hollywood probably right now as we speak or as you're listening to this video. There's way sicker, more twisted things that are happening, and I would say even to underage girls every single day. The biggest issue I think that people have with Kris in this situation is that Kris is also a celebrity. There are so many, I would say even men especially in Hollywood, that are doing things that are so much sicker and so much more twisted to people a hell of a lot younger every single day. We don't really talk about them because we don't really know about them, because they keep themselves behind the scenes. We talk about Kris and we know about Kris because Kris has been a part of her kid's celebrity. So because she's in the public eye herself, she gets more criticism than a lot of the people in Hollywood that are doing a lot more sick and twisted things than somebody like her because she's in the public eye. I'm not saying that to justify anything that she's doing, because I do think it's sick and twisted. That said, I think if we're gonna be upset at Kris for what she's doing, we should also be equally as upset at the other people, primarily men in Hollywood, that are doing things that are even more sick and twisted. If you just focus on what Kris has been doing because she's the one that you can see in the public eye, and you're ignoring all of the other sick and twisted things that Hollywood people are doing, you're missing the point. Again, I'm not justifying it, I'm just saying. So you have the sort of head of the family, Kris Jenner. At this point in the show, at least when the show started and the show got really popular, we don't really know much about her first husband as far as what energy he was in, although we do know he associated himself with some very unhealthy people. She ended up in a relationship with a husband who was very much in wounded feminine energy. Not an uncommon dynamic. It's really important to the story, I believe, of how Kris got to be where Kris is in her very masculine energy. Is she making it work for her and her family? She's being pretty successful with it. Is it gonna have other side effects on her or her relationship with her kids? Probably, but financially, it's quite successful. Usually when people can get really good in their masculine energy, they can usually do really well financially. And I'm just gonna throw out there that Kris has been in a relationship. I don't know if she's still in a relationship with Corey or if she's not, or I don't really know what the status with that is. But what little I've seen of Corey, who was kind of like, kind of her boy toy, so to speak, he seems like he's, you know, more of a go with the flow kind of guy. And that's the kind of guy that a woman who's more in her masculine is going to end up being attracted to, because she's so in her masculine energy and she now has this man who's kind of more like go with the flow. So he was kind of a little bit more like housewife, like the wife at home, and she was more like the masculine leader of the family. Is that kind of a relationship necessarily gonna work? It could, if both people want that. Generally speaking, most people are not gonna be comfortable in that dynamic, because generally speaking, the woman in that dynamic is not gonna be able to respect the man, and the man is gonna resent her for not respecting him. If that's happening in that dynamic, I don't know. I don't know enough about their relationship. I'm just saying that that is typically the way that it ends up going. But if everybody's cool with that dynamic, then everybody's cool with it. So let's get into the kids. Kourtney Kardashian is actually really interesting because as the oldest member of the family, I actually view Kourtney as, ironically, being the most sensitive and empathetic. But I think she blocks that. And I think part of it is because Kim, who is the second in line, and Kourtney and Kim are very close in age, so they were raised almost like twins. Kim has this desperate need to be like her mother. And I'll get to Kim and her mindset. Kim is very much in her masculine. Very often when you're in a dynamic where you have a very masculine mother, and especially if you're in a situation where you have a very masculine mother and a masculine sister, and the masculine sister is constantly getting approval from the masculine mother, a little girl is going to start to reject her feminine. And I see Kourtney, and I've watched her throughout sort of the series, so to speak, of the show, the way they've presented themselves, is that Kourtney to me seems like a woman who desperately wants to connect to her feminine energy, but feels a lot of deep shame around it, judges herself for it. She also, as the oldest sibling, has very often had to be kind of like a stand-in mother, especially to Khloe, that Kourtney has kind of been a surrogate mother to Khloe, so Kourtney has this kind of like mothering energy to her, probably one of the reasons why she got involved with Scott. I'm not gonna dive too much into Scott, although Scott being an only child and, you know, having a complicated relationship with his parents, I think Scott was desperately looking for a family, and I think he was still, I mean, he was quite a bit younger than Kourtney when they got together, and was always really kind of more of a little boy. Kourtney really always kind of had to mother him, and I think that Kourtney was in a situation where I think she thought that she had to mother him. Essentially, she was really watching her mother have to mother her husband. So, you know, especially when Kris was married to Bruce. I think Kourtney fell into that dynamic with Scott. And it was really interesting with Scott. Like, Scott really did seem like he was trying to get Kourtney to open up. Like, he was trying to get her to be more, like, show her feelings, show expression. And Kourtney was so blocked off from any expression, very cold, so to speak. But Kourtney would have moments where she would cry, and it did seem like she was feeling somewhat ashamed of herself when she would cry. It really did seem like Kourtney was just ashamed of any kind of emotional or feminine expression. I think she is a lot more sensitive than her sisters. Maybe not all of them, but I think she is quite a bit more sensitive than them, and felt as a protective shield she had to block that. So I really do see Kourtney as somebody who really wanted to be connected to her feminine. I think especially after she got pregnant the first time and she had Mason, and then she started having her other kids, I think you started to see her want to connect more and more to her feminine. She was starting to really put more value on her body, on motherhood, of actually going with the flow. That's actually where a lot of conflicts happen between Kim and Kourtney, is Kim needs things to be structured, needs things to be her way, which is another aspect to a more wounded masculine. I'll get to Kim in a minute, but Kourtney wants to more go with the flow. She wants to go her own way, do her own thing. She does not want to be stressed and anxious all the time. She doesn't want to live in an overly structured world. She wants more freedom and more flow. That's a sign that she really wants to tap into her feminine, but her family members are not letting her. And I think they've all been programmed to think that the feminine is wrong. Ironically, because they are so girly and over-sexualized, but many of them do not have a connection to their feminine energy at all. I think Kourtney really wants one, and I think she's really trying to get there. One of the things I've actually always loved about Kourtney is she always tends to go her own way. Like, she always kind of likes to be different and do something a little unique and kind of out there, and a little unexpected, and I kind of love that about her, that she kind of isn't afraid to step outside the box and do something different than like exactly what her family is doing. I think she gets a lot of criticism from that. She gets a lot of pushback from her family on that, so I think she's got a lot of conflict. I do worry. I know a lot of people think that her and Travis are like, oh, it's so great, Kourtney found this guy, everything like that. I don't really know much about Travis Barker or anything like that, so I'm not really going to dive into their relationship dynamic. I do worry a little bit, because it does seem like Kourtney, when she gets with a guy, specifically with someone like Travis, she tends to kind of take on his persona, his life, his look, and oftentimes that can be a sign of wounded feminine, of like looking to attach to somebody. I think there can be something to the fact that Kourtney is so independent with her family, and like, I'm not afraid to do something different and step outside the box. Then she gets into a relationship with a man, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna try to be the perfect person for him. I worry a little bit about that, because I worry that her rejection of her family then leads to her latching on to somebody else who may or may not be good for her. And it's like having that sort of like independent, being comfortable, being unique with your family, but then kind of falling into a bit of people-pleasing mode when you're in a relationship, I think can make for a potentially unhealthy relationship dynamic. I I don't know much about their relationship, so I'm not gonna really get into that, but I really do think that Kourtney wants to connect to her feminine energy. I'm rooting for Kourtney, I really am. I really do hope that she gets to connect to her feminine to really live the life that she wants, and I really do hope the best for her, because I do really feel for her, because I do feel like she really wants this life, but she's just never felt comfortable with it, and she's never really felt okay with it because it's so different than what the rest of her family is doing. She seems more like connected to nature. She was the one who was sort of prioritizing home-cooked meals, although apparently she doesn't really cook, but prioritizing what she puts in her body, paying attention to nature, earth, healing, things like that. Like, I really am rooting for Kourtney. Kim is really emulating her mother, and I would actually say that not only is Kim emulating her mother, but she's really gotten into such a masculine energy that it's a very wounded masculine. It's one of the reasons why I think many people think that Kim is also a narcissist, like people believe her mother is, because Kim is ruthless. It's like, I don't care who I hurt, I'm gonna get what I want. That's very often a sign of narcissism. Is she a narcissist? I don't know. Oftentimes, again, when women get into that severe masculine energy, especially when it gets wounded, we automatically associate them with being a narcissist, which is sometimes true, sometimes not. Kim has an obsessive need for perfection, an obsessive need for control, an obsessive need for structure her way. All those things are signs of wounded masculine energy. She obviously puts her career, her being Kim Kardashian, over relationships of every kind. Her life, her career, her work is always her top priority. Everything is always how are things gonna look. She really isn't somebody who can let go with the flow. She has all the signs of being a wounded masculine, which I find ironic because Kim's career, so to speak, has really been based on her being this kind of like almost like hyper-sexualized, hyper sort of feminized, so to speak, in a sense of our over-dramatized version of what superficial feminine is. You know, the exaggerated hips and, you know, the overly made up glamour kind of stuff, which is really more of a surface feminine, but she's such a masculine person. And I think that's also one of the reasons why she tends to get into relationships with guys who don't align with her. I don't really know much about her relationship with Reggie, because he was kind of less in the public eye as far as them being together. I do think that Reggie got caught up in her physical appearance and really didn't fully see her masculine, and Reggie being somebody who was an athlete. A lot of athletes do tend to have much more of like a more wounded feminine adolescent kind of a mentality off the field. Whether he was like that or not, I don't know. I can't really comment on that. Kris Humphries, could not stand Kris Humphries. Could not stand Kris Humphries. Like, I cannot express to you. I think it's triggering me because I was in a relationship with a guy who, I mean, not physically and not financially or anything, but like personality wise was a lot like Kris Humphries. So like, I get really triggered by that. Kris Humphries he was kind of wounded masculine too. I would say wounded masculine, wounded feminine, a little bit of both. It was definitely button heads with her, wounded masculine for sure, and they were never really gonna make it work. I think he really wanted a more traditional woman, and I think he was trying to make a very wounded masculine woman into a more traditional woman, and it just wasn't gonna happen. Honestly, in that relationship, I really felt bad for Kim, and I think it was because I just couldn't stand him, but it was one of the few times I really feel bad for Kim. Kanye, honestly, as an artist, I think Kanye is brilliant. However, very often artists tend to be very much in their feminine energy, and I think Kanye has a very erratic, flowy, creative spirit. Not knocking Kanye at all. He probably would pair well with somebody in more masculine energy. That probably was one of the reasons why him and Kim made it work for so long, was because if Kim could be in a healthy masculine energy and Kanye could be in a healthy feminine energy, it wouldn't be so bad. Like, it wouldn't not work. I mean, it might cause some issues, but if that's really how they were most comfortable, Kim getting into wounded masculine and it would be Kanye getting into more wounded feminine, then they're attracted to their wounding, but that's usually a volatile situation. So I'm not super surprised that they didn't end up working. I think they could have. I think if they both could have stayed in a healthy masculine and healthy feminine energy, but in reality, that really wasn't likely to happen. Whether it be because of his wounding or whether it be because of her wounding, we don't know, but it was probably both. Khloe. Oh, Khloe. My heart goes out to Khloe. Khloe's obviously like a typical middle child. She feels kind of lost. She looks different than the other Kardashians. Khloe, I would say, probably has the most body image issues. And I know, like, I've even read her book. I know she's got this whole platform of health and fitness and all this kind of stuff and whatever. And I know she's really, like, learning to love her body and accept her body and all this kind of stuff. She has so much wounding around her body image. The feminine is the body. The feminine energy literally is the body. And as a woman, if you cannot be comfortable in your own body, you are not going to be able to connect to your feminine energy. I really do believe that's the reason why we set up our whole society, to make women feel bad about themselves. Partly it's to sell us products, and partly it's because it keeps women disconnected from their feminine energy. And women are very powerful in their feminine energy, so if you keep us disconnected from it, can't use our feminine power and strength. Khloe, oh my God. There's so many times I want to shake Khloe and be like, girl, get some self-respect. I mean, I honestly would rather her stay with Lamar, who was basically a drug addict who almost overdosed in a brothel, and she would be better off with him than with Tristan, to be totally honest with you. I think, again, with Lamar, similar to Scott, was searching for a family. And I think he found it in Khloe. I think actually Lamar made a comment about when he met Khloe, Khloe had eyes just like his mother. And his mother who had passed away, and that's very common. When you meet someone and you say to yourself, like, I feel like I've known this person my whole life, which they said a lot because that's why they got married so quickly, usually it's a sign that that person actually reminds you of someone from your past. It is a person from your past that is coming into your life. And I think it's kind of symbolic. I think Khloe, in the same way that Kourtney has felt like she had to be a mother to Khloe, Khloe really has felt like she needed to be a mother, like a surrogate mother to Rob and Kendall and Kylie, because Kris is so in her masculine, right? That Kris really isn't able to have that mother quality to her. She's so caught up in being the masculine leader of the family. So Khloe's really kind of stepped in as that mother figure, and I think when she found Lamar was looking for a family and found a mother figure in Khloe. I think they had a deep love for each other, but at the end of the day, that kind of relationship dynamic isn't going to work, because Khloe's going to be exhausted at having to be the mother and having all the responsibility of constantly having to be the leader of the family. And I think as much as Khloe rejects her feminine, I don't think she's fully comfortable in her masculine. Like, I think Khloe feels like she needs to be in her masculine. She needs to keep a wall up. She is like the masculine shielded woman. Like, she has that masculine wall up. I think she wants to sink into her feminine, similar to Kourtney. Kourtney's wall is a little bit different than Khloe's. I think Kourtney's wall is like to shut down and show no emotion. Khloe's wall is to be like, I'm gonna be tougher than everybody else. Like, I'm gonna be the tough girl. And that's where I think things went wrong with Khloe and Lamar, because at a certain point, Khloe's gonna get exhausted from never being able to relax in her feminine. And Lamar obviously had some addiction problems. And when you have addiction problems, a relationship with somebody with an addiction is almost impossible, because when a person is living in their addictions run the show. Addictions are a very clear sign of wounded feminine energy. I would absolutely say that he exhibited those. Oftentimes that masculine shield that I think that Khloe has especially, it is very much attached to wounded masculine. It's a little bit different than Kim's wounded masculine of needing control and structure. Khloe's masculine shield was a little bit more trying to play the tough girl, and also trying to mother people and trying to like overgive, like give of herself so much. And very often that can attract someone in their wounded feminine. Wounded feminine often comes with addictions. The same way you could argue that Bruce's overspending was an addiction. Lamar obviously had drug addictions and things like that. And a relationship with an addict is really never gonna work. Unless that person can get their addictions under control, cannot have a relationship with an addict. It's not gonna happen. And it's probably gonna drain everything out of you. And that's really where that went wrong. So Khloe's relationship with Tristan's a child. I mean, he's just a child. He's an immature child. He can't keep it in his pants. Like, he is just an immature child. You give him a little fame and money and he's just gonna run around and play around and have no respect for anybody else. And I knew Khloe was gonna have a second kid with him. I knew. I didn't know officially it was gonna be by a surrogate, but I knew she was gonna have a second kid with him, because the Kardashians are so obsessed with the idea of having more than one kid, which to some extent I understand. I'm an only child, so that's not my mentality, but if you do come from a big family, I can see where you would get that idea in your head where you didn't want to have an only child, especially since, you know, getting involved with Scott and Lamar and seeing how only children can be kind of screwed up. I'd say being an only child probably screwed me up a little bit too, but you know, is what it is. But they're also so obsessed with the idea of having all their kids by the same guy. Honestly, I would have had more respect for Khloe had she said, okay, I have my baby with True. I'm gonna do my best to co-parent. I'm gonna do what's best for True. And she just worked on herself, worked on her issues, only dealt with Tristan when it came to their daughter and like she found somebody else who actually loved and cared about her and was going to treat her well, and she had a baby with him, I would have way more respect for her than her insisting on having another kid with a man who clearly does not care or respect her at all. Just gonna say that. I hope that Khloe starts healing her wounds because she's got such deep wounds in her. I don't know. In the same way that I'm rooting for Kourtney, I'm rooting for Khloe, although I do think that Kourtney is closer to being on the road to healing than I think someone like Khloe is. But I do hope that she heals, not just for herself, but for her kids. Oh, Rob Kardashian, he's really lost. He's so lost, and my heart goes out to him. Rob is obviously desperate for masculine brotherhood. I think you saw that too. You know, his father dies when Rob is quite young. His father did tell him that his dying request was that Rob actually get the grades to get into UCLA because that was his father's alma mater, and get a college degree, and Rob did that. So it proves that Rob can actually do something, follow through on something when he's really passionate about it, which is a sign that he's masculine at his core. Unfortunately, he didn't really have good masculine male figures around him after he lost his dad. I do think that when Bruce was Bruce, he tried to step in, but obviously he had a lot of conflicts. He was in his wounded feminine, wasn't necessarily able to be that masculine leader. Rob was surrounded by sisters who were very much in their masculine energy. You know, Rob really latched onto Scott for a while because he was looking for a brother. Scott had his own issues he was going through. Rob latched onto Lamar. They wanted a brotherhood, and they both wanted, you know, a brother in them. And I think that because Lamar had so many issues, I think having those males that Rob was latching onto, and so many of the men in his life were in very wounded feminine, had a lot of addiction problems and weren't stable themselves, that Rob did not have the grounded stability to actually step into his masculinity. He didn't have that masculine leadership. So he's kind of wavering, you know, and I think he obviously has some depression issues that he's talked about before, just very often a very common thing in men who never actually step into their masculine. You see it a lot nowadays with the rampant depression that's happening in men today. It's because they're not stepping into their masculinity, and very often when that happens, men sink into depression. His weight issues could be a sign of a food addiction. We don't know, and I don't want to label that because I do know they've talked about him having other health problems, which are probably a result of him not actually stepping into the man he can be. He doesn't really have a purpose in life. Unfortunately, because he's in that weird situation where he's surrounded by sisters who are getting so much money and attention and fame and just having stuff thrown at them, that he's sort of like, why should I bother better myself or be a better person when I see everyone around me just getting stuff thrown at them for not doing much? Like, you can see where he would fall into that. And he doesn't really have a passion and purpose. He doesn't have something greater than himself. Now, he got involved with China, who very clearly was using him to get even with the Kardashians for what happened with Kylie and Tyga, which is a whole other conversation. And then they had Dream, and China has her own issues. I'm not going to get into China and her whole situation. I don't even really know that much about China, to be honest with you, but she obviously has some issues. Used him to try to get even with the Kardashians, even bragged about the fact that she managed to have the only like Kardashian grandkid, if you think about it, because Rob's the only boy. I hope that Rob heals, specifically for himself, for his daughter. I hope he betters himself. You know, I remember watching him on Dancing with the Stars, and he really was, you know, he had a lot of charisma. I hope he heals. I really do. And I don't know if he's getting the help that he needs. I hope he is. He's a prime example of when you don't have healthy masculine leadership in men to guide you. He doesn't have that. He doesn't have the male figures in his life that are really helping and guiding him. And he's the prime example of what happens when that isn't there. And his only masculine leadership is really in his mom or, you know, his older sisters. And unfortunately, that's just not enough for most men. Can a man who only has a mother figure, maybe who's raised by a single mom or something like that, like, can he step into his masculine energy? Yeah, he can. It's gonna be a lot harder. And in reality, boys need masculine male leaders in order to guide them into their masculinity. Rob is really an example of what happens when, you know, boys get lost and they never really get to step into their true masculine potential. Kendall and Kylie, I know a little bit less about since I watched the show a lot more like earlier on. Kendall has talked a lot about suffering from anxiety. Usually when you have very severe anxiety in a female specifically, what you have is a feminine core being who is being forced into a masculine life that she's not comfortable with. And Kendall started modeling quite young. She's gorgeous. Don't really have a lot of negative things to say about Kendall as far as anything I know about her. She doesn't seem to be that controversial. She seems to be somebody who wants to focus more on her modeling career and be a little bit less in the kind of controversial reality show world. Does seem to be at least that she is, I know she's a big horseback rider. I think she's very connected to animals. She's very into sort of like fashion aesthetics, things like that, all very feminine qualities. I do actually think that Kendall is actually quite feminine. She seems to value like sisterhood, friendships, connections, things like that. I do know like a lot on the show she's kind of like resented Kylie for kind of like dropping her when anytime Kylie had a guy in her life or something like that. Like I think Kendall really does value sisterhood more. However, being thrown into the very like, I know modeling you think of as being like girls, but like it's a very structured world. There's restrictions on what you eat, where you have to be, when you have to be, what you have to do. Like it's a very structured world, and I think that the fact that Kendall has this like crippling anxiety is a sign that the world she's in is not aligned with who she truly is. I actually see Kendall to be very similar to Kourtney in a lot of ways. I think that they're both very feminine at their core, and they want to be connected to their feminine at their core, but they're just in a world that doesn't align with that. I think Kourtney, because she's older, is working through that more. I hope Kendall gets to work through that more, because I think that the sign that she's got this crippling anxiety is probably a sign that the life she's living is probably not in alignment with what her true core self is. Kylie is interesting. Kylie is weird how she's so in the public eye, but yet I feel like she's somewhat reclusive as well. I don't know. It's a weird combination with her. Kylie, of all of them, for me, feels so much more detached. And maybe it's because she's younger and she's got older sisters. She's a little bit, like she's in the public eye, but she's been less a part of the show. I don't really know what it is, but she has to me, an even more detached quality to everything that's going on around her than her sisters. She, I think of all of them, was more hypersexualized at a younger age. The fact that she clearly massively changed her entire appearance before she even turned 18. And I know people are like, oh, puberty. I know how puberty works. I went through puberty. I'm gonna tell you right now, she did not gain the giant hips and butt like overnight. That's not how puberty works. I've had these since I was a kid. Like these have been coming in since I was a child. So I didn't wake up one day and all of a sudden have like eye cups or something like that. Like it doesn't happen that way. Your body starts to grow and develop over time. And yeah, puberty can kind of sneak up on you sometimes, but it doesn't all of a sudden happen like on your 18th birthday. You're like, hey, no, that's plastic surgery. That's the way it works. And the fact that Kylie reconstructed her whole body and her whole appearance essentially to look like Kim, which is something that Khloe's been doing a lot more and more, in it, oh, it breaks my heart. For one, it's an indication of body dysmorphia, which if you know the stats, almost 100% of adolescent girls have some form of body dysmorphia. And when you have that kind of money and that kind of access to everything in the world as far as reconstructive stuff, and you start getting into that with adolescent girls, it's a recipe for disaster. The fact that Kylie, I mean, she ended up basically in a relationship with a much older man when she was underage, and everybody just kind of like looked the other way, like it was no big deal. Then got pregnant so young, like broke up with the guy, got pregnant again, and she's still so young, and she's got all this money, fame, power. I don't know. It's hard to know with Kylie, I feel like, because I feel like as out there as she is, she's trying so hard to pretend to be other people. It's hard to really even know who she actually is, and I'm willing to bet that Kylie doesn't even know who she actually is. It's sad, but I think if anything, she's probably the most likely to end up being more of a wounded masculine, because she's gonna really emulate Kim, who's emulating Kris, and I think that that's where you're gonna see the direction Kylie's gonna go. She might change at some point. She's still really young. I don't know. It's weird. The more I think about Kylie, she's got such a detached, like even with Kim, as much as Kim, I think, tries to keep this kind of like facade around her, or this image and stuff, you do see her crack sometimes. With Kylie, I don't know if I've ever actually noticed her crack at all. I mean, we've probably all seen her crack, but anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, I did actually, I think I talked about this in another video, that like I saw some picture of like Kylie in a bikini or something, and like I knew it was Kylie because I recognized some of the features on her face, but like the rest of her, I was like, she could be anybody. She could be any Instagram model. I think she's like literally like making herself into this generic person. The fact that she's, again, like with Khloe, she's changing everything about her body. Very evident that she's not comfortable in her body, which would be a sign that she's blocking her feminine energy. I know they all say she's like a self-made billionaire. Can we be real? Kris Jenner made her into a billionaire. The only reason why these girls have anything is because of Kris Jenner. Is that a good thing for society? That's very questionable. Is it a good thing for them? Seems to be working for them. Kylie's not a self-made billionaire. She's a Kris Jenner made billionaire. I think we need to reframe that thinking. Yeah, I mean, Kylie's very caught up in, again, with the cosmetics, the makeup, and honestly, like, I wore a lot of Kylie cosmetic lip colors because they were really amazing. I try to switch to things that are less toxic now, but you know, I bought her products, so I can't really judge, but I would say that Kylie's really caught up in the same way that Kim is, in this very like surface feminine, but she's actually more in a masculine mindset. But also I feel like Kylie is kind of like letting other people run the show, and she's just the face of things, which letting other people take charge and then you just showing up and being like, this is who I am. I guess that's kind of what Kim does, but Kim does seem a little bit more of a control freak. So I don't know, with Kylie, I think, you know, we'll probably just have to wait and see. I'm sure that they're not going anywhere, so I'm sure we'll be witnessing this stuff. And you know, hey, I make this video and I could upload this video, and tomorrow one of them or all of them or something could all change their whole image, and I don't know. I do think there is something to the idea that, you know, the Kardashian Jenners really came up in a time where many people were really obsessed with this idea of luxury and getting a peek into this kind of like over-the-top luxury lifestyle. Now the way the world is going with, you know, inflation and the economy and things like that, I think people are really starting to resent them for this lifestyle. Like, it's less something that the general population is fascinated with, but I think a lot of them are holding on to the thing that got them famous in the first place. It'll be interesting to see if they do manage to shift and change with the times, because the times, they are a-changin'. You know, I'm not justifying anything that Kris Jenner has done to get her family famous, but you can't argue with her results. She's gotten her family famous and they don't really have any discernible talent other than just being them. They've tried to get Kim into like music, acting, hosting, things like that. She was awful. I remember watching Kim like having to host some like show or something. She was so awkward. It was one of the most uncomfortable things, and I saw her one time like interviewing somebody on a red carpet like early on in her career. It was one of the most awkward things in the world. Like, she really has no discernible talent except being her. You could argue she is her better than anybody else, although Kylie is starting to be better at being Kim than Kim is. But in reality, Kris has managed to build $1 billion empire off of no discernible talent whatsoever. That may be a talent in itself. I don't know. Is it moral? Is it ethical? I don't know. Is it impressive? Yeah, kind of. So look, I didn't make this video to hate on any of them or to praise any of them. I just wanted to break down this very famous, iconic family and the masculine and feminine energies that they are presenting to us. I know the transgendered issue is very complicated, and I did not want to make this into a transgendered video, so that's why I kind of wanted to talk about Bruce when Bruce was Bruce and Caitlyn when Caitlyn was Caitlyn, and that wasn't really the focus of the video, but I wanted to kind of just touch on that because I do think that the marriage between Kris and Bruce was a very defining moment in the evolution of this family and how they kind of got to where they are now. Again, this is literally just how they present themselves to the public. I don't know what any of these people are like behind closed doors. So I generally don't like to do real life people or real life celebrities, but because they did have a TV show for a long time and a reality show, so to speak, that I thought, you know what, I'm just going to touch on how they present themselves publicly. Since this is uploading on Mother's Day, talking about the probably the most iconic momager of all time just seemed appropriate. So if you're watching this on Mother's Day, the day it's uploaded, and you are a mother or going to be a mother or have a good relationship with your mother or bad relationship with your mother, either way, happy Mother's Day. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you have any thoughts on this video or any other topic requests or anything like that, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you and I love your suggestions. If you're a woman and would like to connect to her feminine energy, I have online courses. Details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.